"Don't touch him," the young alien technician shouted, her voice cracking across the observation deck just as the emergency shutters slammed into place. Nobody listened. Everybody was staring through the reinforced glass at the same impossible sight. The largest predator ever cataloged by the Galactic Biological Authority had escaped containment, and the only person standing between it and the sealed exit was an ordinary human in a faded field jacket. His name was Mason Brooks, 38 years old, born in Billings, Montana, wildlife toxicologist, divorced, father of a 10-year-old daughter who still texted him every Sunday asking when he was finally coming home. Mason had never fired a plasma rifle. He had never served in the military. He wasn't the toughest person on Vesper 9. He just happened to be the closest when every alarm in the facility began screaming at once. The lights shifted from white to deep amber as automated speakers repeated the same warning. Containment breach. Sector 7. Personnel are instructed to shelter immediately. Around him, scientists, security officers, and visiting council delegates rushed toward the emergency doors. Metal barriers locked into place one after another with heavy mechanical thuds. Someone grabbed Mason's sleeve. "Forget the samples," yelled Dr. Nora Hayes. "Run." Mason looked past her shoulder. The creature had already emerged from the shattered containment chamber. It moved with unsettling confidence instead of rage, silent enough that the sound of its footsteps barely carried across the polished floor. Every alien in the room recognized it instantly. The Black Maw. Across 300 years of documented exploration, no recorded species had survived a direct bite from the animal. Its image appeared in military academies, medical schools, and survival manuals across known space as a universal warning. Never engage. Never approach. Never assume escape. Director Kaler stepped backward without taking his eyes off the predator. "Seal the hallway," he ordered. A security officer hesitated. "Sir, there's still a human inside." Kaler didn't blink. Then he has already made his contribution to science. Mason heard the words. He didn't answer. His heartbeat was loud enough inside his own ears. He thought about Lily's last voicemail, the one he still hadn't answered because he promised he would call when his shift ended. He adjusted the old leather bracelet she had made at summer camp before taking one careful step backward. The Black Maw tilted its massive head, studying him with unsettling patience. "Easy," Mason whispered, almost as if he were calming a frightened wolf back on Earth. "Nobody needs to get hurt today." A nervous laugh escaped one of the alien interns watching through the glass. "He thinks it understands him." Then everything happened faster than anyone expected. The predator crossed nearly 20 feet in a blur. Mason raised his left arm instinctively to protect himself as the creature reached him. Every monitor in the control room flashed crimson. Medical officers immediately began counting down survival estimates before anyone had even reached him. 2 minutes, one physician said quietly. Maybe less. Nobody noticed the Black Maw suddenly stop moving. Nobody noticed its breathing change. Because every eye in the room was fixed on the human everyone believed had just become the next name added to the longest obituary in galactic history. The control room exploded into motion, but nobody knew which emergency protocol still mattered. Every simulation the Galactic Biological Authority had ever written assumed one outcome after contact with the Black Maw. The victim died. The investigation began. The facility was decontaminated. Nobody had written instructions for what to do while the victim was still standing. "Medical team to Containment 7 immediately," Director Kaler ordered, his voice calm enough to make everyone else even more uneasy. "Do not administer experimental treatment. We observe first." Dr. Nora Hayes turned toward him so quickly that her chair nearly tipped over. "Observe? He needs help." Kaler never looked away from the glass. "His condition will teach us more than any laboratory model ever could." Nora stared at him in disbelief. "That is a human being. Today he is also irreplaceable data." 2 security officers finally entered the containment corridor carrying portable restraint shields. Neither one moved closer than 30 feet from Mason. Their scanners continued flashing the same crimson warning. Unknown venom. Systemic contamination expected. Fatal prognosis imminent. Mason slowly lowered his arm. The bite mark beneath his torn jacket sleeve throbbed with deep heat, but it felt strangely familiar, almost like the swelling after a rattlesnake field study years earlier in Arizona. He took one slow breath, then another. His vision remained clear. His knees never buckled. "Mason," Nora called through the emergency speaker. "Can you hear me?" He looked toward the observation deck and managed a tired smile. "I hear you. Are you dizzy?" "Not really. Chest pain." He shook his head. "No." The room behind the glass fell silent again. One physician quietly checked his monitor before speaking. Heart rate elevated but stable. Another frowned. Blood pressure is within expected human range. A third scientist leaned closer to his screen. Impossible. The neurotoxin should already be shutting down his nervous system. Kaler folded his hands behind his back. "Run the diagnostics again." "Sir, I already have." "Then run them a third time." Mason looked toward the predator. For the first time since the breach, the enormous creature seemed uncertain. It remained only a few feet away, but instead of advancing, it shifted its weight awkwardly and lowered its massive head. Its breathing became slower, uneven enough that even the microphones mounted throughout the chamber picked up the difference. Nora noticed it first. "Wait." She pointed through the glass. "Why is it backing away?" Nobody answered. Every camera automatically zoomed toward the black maw as it took another unsteady step. One of the xenobiologists whispered almost to himself, "That species does not retreat." Another replied, "It is not retreating. It looks confused." Mason frowned. "That is exactly how I would describe it." He glanced down at the fresh bite on his arm before looking back at the animal. "I think something is wrong with him." Kaler immediately dismissed the suggestion. "The venom is affecting your judgment." But even as he spoke, warning icons suddenly appeared across every veterinary monitor in the control room. Internal metabolic instability, elevated cardiac stress, rapid biochemical fluctuation. The automated system was no longer monitoring Mason alone. It had begun flagging the black maw itself as the patient in immediate danger. No one said a word. Every scientist, every guard, every council observer watched the same impossible stream of data appear one line at a time. And for the very first time since the containment breach, the greatest fear inside the room was no longer for the human. Mason kept his eyes on the black maw, but his mind had already shifted into the same quiet rhythm that had carried him through years of working around dangerous wildlife back on Earth. Panic never helped an injured animal, and it certainly did not help the people standing nearby. He slowly stepped backward, keeping his movements smooth and predictable. "Nobody comes in here," he said, speaking toward the observation window without taking his eyes off the creature. "If it feels cornered, somebody else gets hurt." A security officer immediately objected. "You are the one who was bitten." Mason gave the slightest shake of his head. "I know. Trust me anyway." Dr. Nora Hayes watched him in disbelief. Every medical display still insisted that the human should have been collapsing by now. Yet Mason sounded more concerned about everyone else than himself. She quickly pulled up his latest scan. His immune response was elevated, but every vital sign remained remarkably stable. "Director," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I need permission to enter with a medical team." Kaler answered without hesitation. "Denied. He needs to be examined." "No, he needs to be observed." Nora clenched her jaw. "You are gambling with his life." Kaler finally turned toward her. "Dr. Hayes, if this human survives, we rewrite 3 centuries of biological science. If he does not, then history remains exactly as we expected. Either outcome requires uninterrupted data." Before Nora could answer, another alarm chimed across the laboratory. This one was different. Veterinary telemetry had escalated from yellow to flashing crimson. One technician looked at his monitor twice before speaking. "Director, the black maw's cellular metabolism is dropping." Another scientist frowned. "That is not possible. They are nearly impossible to poison." A third voice joined in. "Its blood chemistry is changing faster than the computer can model." Mason noticed the animal lower itself carefully onto the floor. It was no longer watching him like prey. Instead, it seemed to be studying him with growing uncertainty. He remembered seeing the same expression in injured wolves that had wandered too close to ranches in Montana. Fear looked surprisingly similar across different worlds. "Hey," Mason said softly. "You are not trying to attack anymore, are you?" The massive predator released a slow, uneven breath. It made no attempt to move closer. Nora whispered almost to herself, "It is acting like it is sick." Kaler immediately dismissed the idea. "Impossible. That species has no natural predators." Mason looked up at the observation deck. Maybe where it comes from. The room fell silent again. One of the younger xenobiologists hesitated before raising a question nobody wanted to ask. Director, what if humans are carrying something our database has never seen? Kaler folded his arms. Earth has been studied for decades. Studied, Nora replied quietly, is not the same as understood. The statement lingered in the air as another stream of diagnostic results filled every display. None of them matched any known toxin, infection, or environmental contaminant. Whatever was happening inside the Black Maw had never been recorded anywhere in the Galactic Biological Authority archives. Then every monitor across the control room froze for half a second before displaying the same automated priority message in bold letters. Unknown biological interaction detected. Immediate quarantine of all human biological samples recommended. For the first time since humanity had joined the galactic community, the emergency protocols were no longer trying to protect humans from alien life. They were trying to protect alien life from one ordinary man from Montana. The warning lights had barely stopped flashing when a sharp metallic crash echoed from somewhere deeper inside the research complex. Every head in the control room turned toward the security monitors. Another containment gate had failed. A frightened technician looked up from her console. Director, the auxiliary holding wing just lost power. A second later, 3 smaller research predators that had been secured for behavioral studies slipped into the access corridor, confused by the emergency lockdown. They were nowhere near as dangerous as the Black Maw, but inside a sealed laboratory, they were more than capable of turning panic into disaster. Security teams rushed forward with portable shield projectors. Hold your line, the captain shouted. Blue energy barriers snapped into place across the hallway. The frightened animals darted from one side of the corridor to the other, searching for a way out while alarms continued echoing through the station. Mason glanced from the Black Maw to the new threat. Those barriers are too tight, he called through the glass. You are trapping them. The security captain frowned. They are predators. They are scared, Mason answered. There is a difference. Kaler folded his arms. No one takes instructions from the patient. Mason ignored him. He slowly removed the emergency flashlight clipped to his belt and tossed it across the polished floor. The bright beam rolled into the opposite hallway. Almost instantly, 2 of the smaller creatures followed the moving light instead of charging the nearest security line. Keep the corridor open, Mason shouted. Give them somewhere to go. The captain hesitated only for a moment before lowering one section of the shield. Just as Mason predicted, the confused animals rushed toward the newly opened escape route instead of toward the crowd. The room filled with relieved breaths. Nora looked at Mason through the observation window with growing respect. Even after everything that had happened, he still thought like the wildlife specialist he had always been. The crisis seemed to settle until another alarm interrupted the moment. The Black Maw suddenly lurched to its feet. Gasps spread through the observation deck as the enormous predator stumbled sideways, knocking over a reinforced equipment rack before struggling to steady itself. Several guards instinctively raised their defensive launchers. Do not fire, Mason yelled. It is not attacking. The captain looked uncertain. It is moving toward you. Mason studied the animal carefully. No, it is trying not to fall. Sure enough, the creature stopped only a few feet away. Instead of striking, it lowered its head again, breathing harder than before. Its massive body trembled with every slow inhale. Veterinary specialists rushed through incoming data. Body temperature climbing. Cardiovascular rhythm unstable. Neural activity fluctuating beyond every known biological model. Nora stared at the results. This is accelerating. Kaler's expression finally changed. Confidence gave way to something much quieter. Doubt. He looked from the monitors to Mason's perfectly stable medical chart and back again. Collect every environmental sample, he ordered. Air, water, surface residue. I want every possible variable. One nervous researcher swallowed hard before asking the question nobody wanted to say aloud. Director, what if the variable is the human himself? Kaler did not answer. He simply watched as the Black Maw slowly lowered itself onto the laboratory floor once again, while Mason remained standing with nothing more than a torn sleeve and a sore arm. Then every diagnostic display in the control room cleared at once before a new message appeared across the main screen. Human blood sample requested. Priority level 1. Authorization overridden automatically by the Galactic Emergency Biohazard Network. For the first time in the history of the facility, the highest scientific authority in known space was asking permission to study one ordinary man before anyone else could. The laboratory doors finally unlocked with a heavy mechanical click, but nobody rushed inside. Even the emergency medical team hesitated, waiting for someone else to make the first move. Mason looked toward the observation deck and gave a small shrug. I promise I am not planning to bite anybody. A few nervous laughs escaped the room before dying just as quickly. The tension was still too thick. Dr. Nora Hayes was the first to step through the doorway carrying a portable medical scanner. She stopped a few feet away. How are you feeling? Mason rolled his shoulder carefully before flexing his injured hand. Honestly, I have had worse days cleaning up after injured grizzly bears. Nora blinked. You are comparing this to wildlife work? Everything acts differently when it is scared. She slowly scanned his arm. Every number looked ordinary. His body temperature was normal. Oxygen levels were normal. Heart rhythm was normal. The bite itself was already showing signs of healing that should have taken days instead of minutes. Nora lowered the scanner and whispered, "That cannot be right." Behind them, the black maw remained lying quietly on the laboratory floor. Its breathing had become slower, each breath separated by several long seconds. Veterinary specialists entered from the opposite side with remote monitoring equipment, but every new reading only deepened the mystery. One scientist looked up from his display. Its immune system is overreacting. Another shook his head. No, it is not attacking an infection. It is attacking something inside its own bloodstream. Director Kaler walked into the chamber for the first time since the containment breach. His confidence had returned, although it looked thinner than before. Collect a blood sample from the predator. The veterinary team exchanged uncertain glances. Minutes later, the first biochemical comparison appeared on the central display. The room went completely silent. Nora stepped closer to the screen. Run that again. The computer processed the data twice more. The result never changed. Tiny molecular markers from Mason's blood had been detected inside the predator's circulatory system. They were not multiplying. They were not behaving like bacteria or viruses. They were simply triggering an overwhelming biological response unlike anything in the galactic database. That is impossible, Kaler said quietly. Human cells cannot survive in that environment. Mason looked at the monitor, then back at his arm. Maybe they do not have to survive. Everyone turned toward him. He continued thinking out loud. Back on Earth, some animals react badly to things that barely affect us. Chocolate is harmless for people, but dangerous for dogs. Certain flowers can poison cats without bothering humans at all. Biology is weird. Nora slowly nodded as the idea settled in. You think this is not a weapon? Mason shrugged. I think Earth has been experimenting for billions of years without asking anyone's permission. Before anyone could answer, every monitor inside the laboratory flashed with an incoming transmission carrying the seal of the Galactic Biological Authority. A calm synthetic voice filled the room. Emergency Directive 7. Effective immediately. All human biological samples are to be classified as restricted material. No further exposure between human personnel and non-human apex species is authorized pending investigation. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then another alert interrupted the broadcast. It came not from the laboratory, but from the orbital communication array above Vesper 9. An encrypted priority vessel had entered the system without prior clearance, transmitting only one short message to the station below. Maintain custody of the human. A special delegation is already on its way. Mason looked through the observation window toward the stars beyond the station and quietly said, That cannot be good. The docking alarms echoed through Vesper 9 just as the unidentified vessel locked itself onto the station without waiting for clearance. Every screen inside the command center automatically switched to the same transmission. No greeting. No diplomatic introduction. Only a silver insignia belonging to the Galactic Biological Authority and a single line beneath it. Biological priority override accepted. Director Kaler smiled for the first time since the containment breach. Good, he said quietly. Now this becomes our discovery. Nora immediately turned toward him. Our discovery? Mason is not laboratory property. Kaler answered without raising his voice. From this moment forward, He is the center of the most important biological event in recorded history. We cannot allow uncontrolled access. Mason leaned against a laboratory console while another medical scan completed. Funny, he said. Back home, we usually ask people before turning them into research projects. Kaler barely acknowledged the joke. Instead, he activated a private security channel. Moments later, reinforced containment doors began sliding into place around the laboratory. Nora looked toward the exits. Why are you sealing the room? For quarantine, Kaler replied. That is not quarantine, she answered. That is imprisonment. Before anyone could argue further, the station lights dimmed again. Emergency power shifted away from civilian sectors and into research operations. Security drones descended from hidden ceiling compartments, taking silent positions around the laboratory. They did not aim at the Black Maw. They positioned themselves around Mason. The message was impossible to misunderstand. One of the security officers hesitated before speaking. Director, are we detaining the human? Kaler folded his hands behind his back. We are protecting an irreplaceable scientific asset. Mason sighed. I really preferred being called a wildlife guy. Nora stepped beside him. You cannot do this. Kaler finally faced her. Dr. Hayes, if word spreads before we understand what happened here, every government in the galaxy will demand custody of him. I intend to prevent that. Mason looked directly at Kaler. You are not trying to protect me. Kaler remained silent. You are trying to own whatever is inside my blood. The room grew quiet. No one challenged the statement because everyone knew it was true. At that exact moment, another alert interrupted the standoff. Veterinary monitors surrounding the Black Maw erupted with warning tones. The creature, which had barely moved for several minutes, suddenly struggled back onto its feet. Its breathing became rapid. It staggered several steps before collapsing against a reinforced support column, sending tools and equipment sliding across the polished floor. Security drones instantly redirected toward the massive predator while technicians scrambled for cover. Mason instinctively took one step forward. Hold on. Nora grabbed his sleeve. What are you doing? Looking. That thing almost killed you. Mason shook his head. No. It stopped trying a long time ago. Ignoring the frightened voices behind him, he slowly approached until he stood only a few yards from the exhausted animal. The Black Maw lifted its head weakly. Instead of aggression, there was confusion in its dark eyes, as though its own body had become something it no longer recognized. Mason quietly knelt, careful not to make any sudden movement. You do not know what is happening either, do you? Behind him, Kaler watched with growing fascination rather than concern. Then, unnoticed by everyone except one nervous laboratory technician, Kaler discreetly entered an authorization code into his wrist console. Deep below the station, another classified containment vault acknowledged the command. Status changed from locked to release pending. Whatever Kaler had just ordered, it was not meant to save Mason. It was meant to prove a theory that no ethical scientist should ever have tested. The hidden authorization completed without a sound. Deep beneath Vesper 9, magnetic locks disengaged one after another inside a classified research vault that did not appear on any public station blueprint. Only Director Kaler knew it existed. Only he knew what had been kept there for nearly 20 years. A nervous technician noticed the status light on her console change from gray to amber. Director, she whispered, Containment Vault 12 is coming online. Kaler answered without looking at her. That is correct. Nobody approved this. I did. Nora's expression hardened. What is inside Vault 12? Kaler remained silent for several seconds before finally speaking. Insurance. Mason slowly stood from beside the exhausted Black Maw. I have a feeling I am not going to like what that means. Before anyone could ask another question, the station floor vibrated beneath their feet. It was subtle at first, almost like distant thunder rolling through steel walls. Then another vibration followed, stronger this time. Emergency lights shifted from amber to crimson as a calm computer voice echoed across every corridor. Restricted containment system active. Security officers exchanged confused looks. One of them turned toward Kaler. Sir, command authorization for this level requires council approval. Kaler calmly clasped his hands behind his back. Then it is fortunate the council is several light years away. Nora stepped directly in front of him. You are violating every biological ethics treaty ever signed. History remembers results, Kaler answered. Not committee meetings. Mason let out a quiet breath. That usually means somebody is about to make a terrible decision. Another heavy impact shook the laboratory. Ceiling dust drifted into the air. Somewhere beyond the reinforced walls, massive mechanical doors were opening one after another. The remaining security drones immediately abandoned their positions around Mason and redirected toward the lower transport corridor. Their threat assessment had changed. Whatever was approaching had just become the highest priority on the station. A frightened communications officer looked up from his monitor. Director, internal sensors are tracking movement. Good. It is moving faster than expected. Kaler smiled slightly. Excellent. Mason frowned. You planned this before the docking request ever arrived, did not you? Kaler finally met his eyes. I needed certainty. One incident could have been coincidence. Two incidents become evidence. Nora's voice rose. You released another apex predator. Kaler did not deny it. A more advanced specimen. Larger. Better adapted. If your blood truly changes the outcome, science deserves proof beyond statistical doubt. Mason stared at him in disbelief. You are risking everyone in this station just to satisfy your own theory. No, Kaler replied calmly. I am risking one station to redefine biology forever. Another alarm interrupted them. Live surveillance from the lower containment level appeared across the main screen. Thick security doors slowly slid apart, revealing only darkness inside the enormous chamber. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then a pair of glowing eyes appeared. The creature stepped into the corridor with deliberate confidence, noticeably larger than the black maw and covered in dark metallic scales that reflected the emergency lights. Even the veteran security captain quietly muttered, I thought those were extinct. Nora looked at the identification file as it populated across her display, and the color drained from her face. Director, this species was banned from research after the Eltran disaster. Kaler answered with unsettling calm. Which is exactly why its reaction will be scientifically valuable. Mason glanced at the exhausted black maw lying behind him, then back toward the live feed, showing the newly released predator approaching the laboratory one steady step at a time. He slowly rolled down his torn sleeve over the fading bite mark and said, almost to himself, I do not think it is coming here to hunt. Nobody understood what he meant until every motion sensor outside the laboratory suddenly began tracking not one moving life form, but two, and the second unidentified signal was heading toward the first at an even greater speed. Every monitor inside Vesper 9 followed the same two moving signals as they raced through the lower containment corridor. One belonged to the newly released apex predator. The other belonged to the weakened black maw that everyone believed could barely stand a few minutes earlier. Nobody understood how it had crossed half the station without triggering additional alarms until the security replay revealed the truth. The black maw had not escaped. It had ignored every open corridor leading away from danger and headed directly toward the new threat. Nora stared at the footage in disbelief. It is intercepting it. The security captain shook his head. Predators do not protect each other. Mason quietly corrected him. No, but sick animals recognize danger long before healthy ones do. Kaler refused to look away from the live feed. Continue recording everything. The two massive creatures finally came into view at opposite ends of the same corridor. The newly released specimen advanced with calm confidence, while the exhausted black maw planted itself squarely in the middle of the passage. For several tense seconds, neither one moved. Then the larger predator slowed to a stop. It lifted its head, tasting the air instead of charging forward. Every biological sensor in the hallway suddenly overloaded with incoming data. One technician gasped. Director, both organisms are releasing emergency biochemical signals. Nora zoomed in on the analysis. These are not attack markers. Then what are they? Asked the communications officer. She swallowed before answering. Stress warnings. They are signaling each other. Mason folded his arms. Back on Earth, wolves, elephants, and whales all communicate danger in different ways. Maybe these two are doing the same thing. Kaler dismissed the idea. They are engineered apex predators. Fear responses were intentionally minimized. Nora kept reading the incoming analysis. Maybe fear was minimized. Survival was not. Another stream of data appeared across the screen. Both predators had entered identical metabolic distress within seconds of detecting traces of Mason's blood still lingering inside the laboratory ventilation system. The realization spread through the room, one silent face at a time. The blood itself was enough. Direct contact had never been the real trigger. Mason looked down at the fading mark on his arm. So, it was never trying to hunt me after the bite. Nora slowly nodded. It was trying to understand why every instinct it had suddenly told it to stay away. Kaler's confidence finally cracked. Impossible. No, Nora answered. You assumed humans were vulnerable because every database classified us that way. The database was incomplete. Before Kaler could respond, the station received another encrypted transmission from the approaching Galactic Biological Authority vessel. This time the message bypassed his command authority and appeared on every display in the facility. Attention, all personnel. Preserve all evidence. Director Kaler is relieved of operational control pending investigation into unauthorized biological experimentation. Security officers looked at one another uncertainly before lowering their weapons. Kaler reached toward his wrist console, but the system rejected every command. His clearance had already been revoked. For the first time since the incident began, he looked genuinely frightened. Mason walked over without raising his voice. You spent your whole career believing the universe could be controlled inside a laboratory. Kaler said nothing. Mason glanced through the observation window toward the stars where the authority vessel was entering orbit. Nature usually has other plans. Just then the central computer issued one final update that nobody in the room had expected. Comparative analysis complete. Human biological response not classified as toxin, pathogen, or weapon. New designation recommended. Ecological incompatibility. Nora stared at the words for several long seconds before whispering. We were asking the wrong question all along. Mason looked at her. What should we have been asking? She met his eyes and quietly replied. Not why you survived, but why every apex predator in the galaxy evolved to fear something that only exists on Earth. The investigation aboard Vesper 9 ended far more quietly than it had begun. No victory speeches echoed through the station. No celebrations filled the halls. The emergency crews simply returned to work, replacing damaged equipment, while investigators from the Galactic Biological Authority moved from room to room collecting evidence that would reshape every biological textbook in known space. Director Kaler stood silently as his security clearance disappeared from every system he had once controlled. Nobody argued with the decision. Nobody defended him. The recordings of his unauthorized orders had already reached the council before the investigation team even stepped off their shuttle. As officers escorted him toward the docking bay, he stopped beside Mason one last time. You realize they will spend decades trying to understand you. Mason smiled politely. I hope they spend the same amount of time trying to understand themselves. Kaler lowered his eyes without another word and continued walking. Nora found Mason standing alone inside the observation dome, looking out across the stars. Earth was only another blue marker on the navigation display, impossibly far away, yet somehow still feeling close. Your transport leaves in 30 minutes, she said. Mason nodded. My daughter has been waiting long enough. Nora handed him a sealed data crystal. Your medical report. Mason laughed softly. Do I want to know? Honestly, not much. Every test says you are completely healthy. Then what is on the crystal? Nora looked back toward the laboratory where the black maw rested peacefully inside a redesigned habitat instead of a reinforced prison. Everything else. She explained that the authority had completed its final analysis. Human biology was not toxic. It was not magical. It was simply the product of a planet that had spent billions of years forcing life to adapt to endless competition, changing climates, unfamiliar microbes, poisonous plants, dangerous animals, and impossible odds. Earth had never built perfect organisms. It had built survivors. The report ended with a recommendation that every research institution in the galaxy would soon receive. Human biological systems were no longer to be viewed as anomalies requiring correction. They were to be studied as independent evolutionary models deserving respect rather than assumption. Mason slipped the crystal into his jacket pocket. That sounds expensive. Nora laughed for the first time since they met. You have no idea. As he boarded the shuttle, workers carefully opened the habitat doors behind him. The recovering black moss slowly stepped outside, paused for a long moment and looked toward the departing ship. It did not growl. It did not charge. It simply watched until the shuttle disappeared into the darkness above Vesper 9. Hours later, Mason finally answered the voicemail he had missed. Lily picked up almost immediately. "Dad, hey kiddo, are you coming home?" Mason looked out the window as Earth slowly grew brighter against the sea of stars. "Yes. Did work go okay?" He smiled to himself. "It was a strange week." Lily laughed. "You always say that." Mason leaned back in his seat. "Maybe one day I will tell you the whole story." Across the galaxy, governments rewrote safety protocols, universities rewrote biology courses, and military strategists quietly removed one dangerous assumption from every threat assessment they had ever written. Humanity had not become more dangerous overnight. The galaxy had simply discovered how little it had understood the quiet species from a small blue world. Sometimes the greatest strength was never hidden behind bigger weapons or louder voices. Sometimes it was hidden inside ordinary people who never believed they were extraordinary at all. And perhaps that was the lesson the stars needed most. Never mistake kindness for weakness, and never assume that survival looks impressive while it is still learning to smile.